I'm Ed Adams, and this is the Weekly Genealogy Toolkit, the podcast that helps new genealogists get the most out of their research time and avoid the most common pitfalls. Well, we've made it to the big one. World War II solidified the United States' role in the world for the next half-century or more. It, along with the aftermath of World War I, constructed the stage upon which all modern international political games are played. I know there are a lot of people who are interested in understanding their ancestors' roles in war, but as a relatively modern conflict, most of us will only have between 1 to 4 people who are direct line ancestors who could have been involved. Depending on your age, you may in fact not have anyone in your family who was of the right age to have been involved. But World War II was somewhat unique in American history in that there weren't a lot of people who it didn't touch in some way. While only a little over 16 million Americans served actively in the military, about 12% of the population, subtracting 350,000 for the women who served in the military, about 35% of the eligible male population served. If you factored out those who could not serve due to physical disability, you're looking at a pretty significant portion of men who were fit to fight. Now, looking back at those 350,000 women, that is of course a small fraction of the young women in America at the time, but it's not a small number in and of itself. It's a large enough number that I would definitely check the female members of my family as well to see if perhaps Grandma may have been in the Women's Army Corps, and just neglected to mention that little tidbit. Either way, if you have a parent or a grandparent or 4 who served during the war, I'm imagining that you'd like to know a little bit about what they did. But at this point in the series, you know the drill. First, you're going to want to put their service into some sort of context. I think this is the first war that I'm not going to recommend a book for. There are just too many, and the war is so monstrous. With so many things happening simultaneously around the globe, I'm not sure that reading some epic history of the war would do you any good. There are some good documentaries, and of course there's always YouTube, but I think if you're the kind of person who's interested in understanding their family history, you've probably picked up a lot of the larger context that you need simply by being an American and existing in the 20th and 21st centuries. I remember as a kid, I felt like every Saturday there were old black and white World War II documentaries on. Oddly, timed to start not long after the morning cartoons ended. Instead, I think it makes more sense to focus your context building on gaining a better understanding of the branch of service that your ancestor served in. Not to downplay my sister's service's contributions to American history, but I'll just say that World War II saw significant contributions by the entire Joint Force. I'll leave it at that. So I'll try and provide some good sources for each. I'll also say that while the Air Force was the U.S. Army Air Force at the time, due to a major injustice, the current Air Force more or less owns the history of the U.S. Army Air Force rather than the Army. So, if your relative fought in the skies, you really don't have a good place to go for an official published history, since the Air Force doesn't have as active a historical program as the Army and Navy do. But there are some good general history books. The best I've read is Masters of the Air. I know it's out as a mini-series on Apple TV, but I haven't seen it, so I can't recommend it one way or the other, but the book is phenomenal. The Navy's historic program is prolific, but a little bit on the odd side, I feel like. They have a number of World War II-focused publications, but they're more focused on micro-histories of specific topics or campaigns. They have a number of good ship histories, but I've yet to find a good overview of the naval forces in World War II from the Navy. On the popular history side, I've enjoyed The Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors by James Horn Fisher, which is also a microhistory of the Battle of Samar, but it gives you a great feel of what destroyer warfare in the Pacific was like. Silent Victory by the unparalleled Clay Blair Jr. will be the only book anyone will ever need on the U.S. submarine war in the Pacific. It fits more the bill of being a complete overview. It's an absolute tome at almost 900 pages before the appendices, but he's really the master of submarine history. He also wrote a 2-part series on the German submarine operations entitled The Hunters and The Hunted. I know I've read a good book or two on naval aviation during the war, but none of them really managed to stand out enough in my memory for me to offer you a recommendation. The Marine Corps official history program is not anything to write home about either. They have publications that you can get, but most are not available online, and you have to submit a request to order which publications you want. I've never done that, so I can't vouch. Now, the Army was the largest service by several orders of magnitude, and they've also got the most prolific historic program. The Army's Center of Military History has over 600 publications, and the majority of which are freely available online. For World War II context building, I'd recommend A Brief History of the U.S. Army in World War II, published in 1992. It's a short history of the Army's involvement in Europe and the Pacific, and all in less than 50 pages. If you really want to go deep, check out the Reader's Guide to the United States Army in World War II. It's an extensive bibliography organized by topic. If there's something you want to know, you can definitely find the source for it in there. You may think that I'm just seizing this as an opportunity to praise the Army and make fun of all the other services, but I'm really not. This is my plea to the other services to step up their game. We'd all benefit. So now you're armed with some background knowledge and you're ready to dig into the sources. Now, if you're a regular listener, you'll probably already be saying, yeah, but they all burned in 1973. To this, I'd offer, sure. The official military personnel files, or OMPFs, did burn with about 80% of the records for the Army lost. But I've never seen good information on how many naval records were damaged. I know some were, but it seems to have been a small number. But I've never tried to request a naval record from the National Personnel Records Center, so if your ancestor was a sailor, I'd certainly give it a shot. But for the rest of you, I'd say give it a shot as well. 80% loss means 20% saved. But there might also be partial records still available. I have seen people get copies of obviously fire-damaged papers, so they're willing to go digging if you're willing to ask. As I said in last week's episode, you'll also probably find that they can retrieve other records from outside the OMPF collection that can help satisfy some of what you're looking for. When I made the request for my grandfather's records, we were told that his official file was lost in the fire, but they did send a copy of his discharge papers, or what we'd today call a DD-214. It has a lot of good information in it. It's not got as much as a full OMPF would for sure, but if you don't know much about what your ancestor did, it'll tell you a lot. And like I said, a 20% chance of success is a heck of a lot better than the lottery, and if you win, I know of some OMPFs that have a few hundred pages in them. Imagine getting your hands on that. You might learn some things about old Peepaw that he probably wouldn't want you to know. A set of records that sound like they might be related to OMPFs, but really aren't, are the Individual Deceased Personnel Files, or the IDPFs. These are the complete records regarding the death of soldiers who died during the war. These have some really interesting and unusual record types that you just won't find elsewhere. I've seen IDPFs for the Army Air Corps soldiers that have incredible detail. A list of the full crew, the aircraft that they were on, where and when they were shot down, the weather at the time. Heck, I've even seen what serial numbers of machine guns were on board when they were shot down. I've seen dental records, complete initial physical exam records. I've even seen records indicating how much the soldier owed the Army at the time of death. And yes, the Army will make sure that those debts are settled before sending the final pay to the next of kin. In cases where the family requested an exhumation after the war to move remains to a local or national cemetery, I've seen complete records indicating the full chain of custody of the remains. You can trace the exact route taken from their overseas burial to their final resting place. If you send a request for those sorts of records, you may have to submit a Freedom of Information Act request in some cases. It's surprisingly easy and not near as intimidating as it sounds. There will likely be some minor costs involved unless the records are for close family, in which case they may be waived. IDPFs seem to be in a few different locations, but you can submit your request to the Army's Human Resources Command at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I'll leave addressing instructions in the description. There are some IDPFs available online, and I'll link to them in the episode description as well, but even if your ancestor's file isn't among them, it's still interesting to look through and see what you might be able to get if you submit your request. If your ancestor died overseas and their remains were never returned to the United States, you can write to the American Battle Monuments Commission to get more information about their burial location. Just understand that in many cases, due to the circumstances of loss, there may not have been any remains to recover, or they may not have been able to recover your ancestors' remains. So, there may not be any burial information to find. The DoD takes seriously its responsibility to bring every soldier home, though, and there are efforts underway every day to recover our lost dead. There remain over 72,000 unaccounted for soldiers missing from World War II, and the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency works with entities around the globe to recover and identify the remains of American soldiers lost from every war. It's a fascinating mission that actually involves a fair bit of genealogy. Beyond service and casualty records, which will have the most interesting and complete information if you can find them, draft records are probably the easiest to find. Just like with World War I, many, many more men registered for the draft than were actually drafted. About 50 million registrants means that you'll most likely find some ancestors in those records. There were 6 registration periods over the war that varied in terms of targeted ages. The 4th registration is generally considered not a real draft registration since it was targeted at men ages 45 to 65 who were not really considered eligible for military service. There's some good information there, though, so even if it's not that useful for understanding your ancestors' service, I'd still definitely have a look. There are a number of other kinds of sources that are available online, mostly on Fold 3, but you can find them elsewhere as well. For those of you with naval veterans, Fold 3 has muster rolls, submarine war patrol reports, JAG case files, cruise books, and some more. Not all of these will have information directly about your ancestors, so they may not come up when you just search for your ancestor's name. For example, let's say your ancestor served on the USS Gato. I'm sure you've Googled the boat and seen cool pictures and read the Wikipedia page and all, but if you look for it on Fold 3, you'll be able to read the actual patrol reports. I'll read a quick excerpt from the 4th of April 1943 to give you a sense of the things that you can discover. 0311 local. First of 3 depth charges detonated as we passed 150 feet. The first one was practically a direct hit. The shock was so violent, the vessel seemed to jump an appreciable distance. Fire extinguishers, flashlights, and such items left their receptacles. Cork left the bulkheads, and air could be heard leaking into the boat. I don't know about you, but for me, that's a heck of a lot better than a photo in a Wikipedia article. The Gato alone has almost 500 pages in their patrol reports. Veterans Affairs pension records from World War II are not something that I have any experience with, but I know that VA regional offices maintain records on claims, so you might write to whichever office is nearest to where your ancestor lived and see if they have anything. Likewise, there are some POW records available on Ancestry and Fold 3, and Fold 3's British cousin, known as the Forces War Records, but I've not found them all that useful. They're basically indexes of prisoners, so you can find out that your ancestor was a prisoner of war, but that's about it. The British records contain a little more information, but not much. As I mentioned last week, you should also look into unit and ship histories to get some more in-depth context. These are really useful if your ancestor didn't serve in a particularly storied organization. Not everyone was surrounded at Bastogne, but that doesn't make their story any less interesting to their descendants. There are a lot of these available through Family Search. But the bad news is that most of them are not available online. You'll have to actually go to Salt Lake City to the Family Search Library to get your hands on them. Many of them are available in libraries located on military installations, but that's a call-ahead kind of thing. First, you'll need to be able to get on the installation, but not all installations allow free access to their libraries without a military or veteran ID. As always, though, don't be afraid to try the interlibrary loan through your own local library. I'll start to bring this episode to a close by offering another shout-out to veterans organizations like the DFW, the DAV, American Legion, or the Military Order of Purple Heart, and others. The primary purpose of these organizations is serving the veteran community, but they also maintain organizational records just like any group, and you may be able to find some interesting information about your relative after the war was over. This brings the series to an end. That doesn't mean that you can't research your family who served in Korea, Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, or the Gulf. It just means that in some ways it will be very similar to doing World War II research, and in some ways it's going to be more like trying to get information about anyone who's alive today. Very difficult. Either way, I hope that over the course of the series you've learned that there are some strategies that you can follow when doing military research. And I really hope that this has encouraged you to take a step beyond what you have found on Ancestry and get a real appreciation for those veterans in your family. Thanks for sticking with me through this. You've really earned your spurs at this point, but more importantly, you've fought your way back to a more normal programming schedule for the podcast. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.